Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe it was the SEALs' way of protecting their pride, or maybe it was just instinct, closing ranks around their own. But Nicole noticed. She always noticed. Her seat was at the edge of the table, not by choice but by design. She didn't belong here, not in their eyes. 8 men with tridents on their uniforms, scars on their arms, and years of war carved into their faces. And then there was her army, not navy. A sniper, yes, but to them, just another attachment, a guest, disposable. She didn't speak, she didn't argue, she listened. The commander's voice cut through the hum of the projector. Observation only, no shots fired, no deviations. His tone was final. He'd been doing this too long to leave room for interpretation. Nicole folded her hands in her lap, the muscles in her jaw tightening. He hadn't even looked at her when he said it. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Hours later, the desert air clung to her skin like a second uniform. Dry, sharp, suffocating. She lay prone on the jagged earth, body pressed into the stones, rifle angled toward a compound that shimmered in the afternoon heat. From her position, she could see it all. The gates, the guards, the shadows packing the perimeter. And inside, somewhere in the haze of stone walls and tinted glass, the enemy's heartbeat. 2,247 yards away. She whispered the number in her mind the way a pianist whispers notes before a concert. It was beyond doctrine, beyond probability, beyond what any of them thought possible. The Barrett's scope pressed into her brow as she adjusted again and again, never satisfied. Wind curled along the ridges, pushing grains of sand into her face, stinging her eyes. She blinked, steadying her breath. Every movement was deliberate, a ritual. To the SEALs, she looked calm, just another sniper taking her turn on Overwatch. They didn't see the calculations tumbling through her head like a storm. Air density, humidity, barometric pressure. She had memorized them before they left the safe house, running equations on scraps of paper like other soldiers cleaned their weapons. And still, she felt the weight of doubt. She had been doubted her entire life. By classmates who thought she was too strange, by instructors who thought she was too rigid, by commanders who thought she was too young, too quiet, too female, and now by a SEAL commander who had made it clear, without words, that she didn't belong in his war. Nicole let the thought sit in her chest like a stone. Doubt didn't hurt anymore. It only sharpened her. A voice crackled in her earpiece. Hayes' assessment. She didn't lift her head, didn't shift. Her reply came soft, measured, clinical. 3 primary structures, heavy perimeter security. Upper floor shows thermal concentration, likely meeting in progress. Silence followed, a pause, and she knew what they were thinking. That was all she was here for, to watch, to confirm, to say the obvious. But then movement caught her eye. 3 men. The cut of their uniforms was unmistakable. Even at this distance, she recognized the bearing. Generals, high command, standing in the open behind glass that wasn't meant to stop a .50 caliber round. Her lips parted. For a moment she considered saying nothing, letting the mission stay what it was supposed to be: safe, simple, clean. But the soldier in her, the part that lived for precision, wouldn't allow it. 3 high-value targets, upper floor, northwest windows, visual confirmed. The commander crawled beside her, binoculars pressed to his face. A sharp inhale, a curse under his breath. Christ. Nicole didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes stayed locked to the scope. She already knew what came next. Range is prohibitive, he said into his radio. No viable engagement. Recommend abort on elimination directive. She let the words wash over her. Prohibitive, no viable engagement, abort. Her heartbeat slowed, not sped. It always did when she reached the edge of impossibility. A strange calm, as though part of her had been waiting for this exact moment. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, I can take them. The SEAL commander turned his head, his face lined with disbelief. What did you just say? Nicole shifted her grip, finger resting along the receiver, not the trigger. Her voice steady, unflinching. I can eliminate all three. The silence around her deepened. She could feel their stares like heat on her back. The commander leaned closer, his voice low, sharp. That's 2,200 yards. Do you understand the physics involved? That's not confidence, Sergeant. That's fantasy. Nicole finally lifted her head from the scope, meeting his eyes. She didn't blink. With respect, sir, physics is exactly why I know I can. For a second, she saw something flicker in him. Not belief. Not yet. But the tiniest hesitation, the pause of a man who had lived long enough to recognize that certainty like hers didn't come cheap. And in that pause, a memory slipped into her mind. Her father's hands, stained with graphite, guiding hers across a chalkboard filled with arcs and numbers. Her mother's voice in the next room, reciting formulas like bedtime stories. Trajectories had been her lullabies, ballistics her language. Before she ever held a rifle, she had held equations. Sir, she said softly, this is what I was built for. The commander's eyes narrowed. He searched her face for cracks, for bravado, for any hint of the arrogance that usually got men killed. He found none, only a quiet, unsettling certainty. And still he shook his head. If you miss even one shot, we're compromised. You understand that. No rescue, no cavalry, we vanish. I understand. Then prove it. Nicole's body sank back into the earth, her cheek pressing against the stock, scope realigning with the first target. She felt the rifle breathe beneath her fingers, the steel humming like a living thing. But she didn't fire, not yet. Her mind drifted back, just for a breath, to the years she had spent hidden in shadows. Missions no one admitted happened. Names she had erased with silence. She thought of the first time she was asked to do the impossible, how her hands had trembled afterward when no one was looking. How she had cried alone in a tent because no medal would ever pin away the weight of taking a life. She never wanted to be a legend, but legends weren't chosen. They were forged by necessity when the line between possible and impossible vanished. She exhaled slowly and whispered into the silence of the desert, "Mark my words, they're already dead." The commander swallowed hard. He looked away, maybe to hide his doubt, maybe to hide his fear. And in that moment, Nicole Hayes, the soldier they had almost ignored, the woman pushed to the edge of the table, became the center of the war. But she felt no pride, only the gravity of what came next. Because for all her calculations, all her certainty, she knew the truth. One mistake, one twitch of doubt, and not only would the mission fail, she would bury every man lying in the dirt beside her. Her finger tightened near the trigger. The desert stilled, and inside her chest, her heart beat the question she never asked aloud. What if this time, the impossible wasn't enough? The desert had a way of swallowing sound. Even the whispers of the SEAL team faded into the earth, leaving only the low thrum of wind along the rocks. Nicole felt it against her cheek, a brush of heat and grit. She knew what it meant. Wind didn't move the same here as it did back home. It curled, it twisted, it played tricks on anyone arrogant enough to ignore it. Her rifle lay steady, but her mind spun with numbers. Wind speed, 12 miles per hour at ground. At the ridgeline, different. She didn't need a weather station to know. Years of watching smoke, sand, even the trembling of leaves had taught her to read air as if it spoke. The bullets she would send would fly through shifting rivers of pressure, invisible streams that bent steel and decided fates. She adjusted her scope, not once, not twice, but until every fraction of glass showed her a window into inevitability. Behind her, the commander crouched, still watching her with disbelief. His binoculars caught the figures inside the compound. He saw what she saw, 3 men leaning over a table of maps, unaware that the desert itself was holding its breath. He muttered into his radio, voice rough. Targets confirmed. Hayes claims she can take the shot. Repeat, Army sniper claims engagement possible. The response crackled back, short, clipped. Authorization granted, proceed if viable. Nicole didn't need to hear it. She already knew the decision had been made the moment she spoke. Her heart slowed again, the way it always did when the world narrowed to crosshairs. She felt her pulse fade until it was a whisper, her breath stretching thin and even. Every movement of her chest was measured, a metronome of survival. But inside her another rhythm stirred. Doubt. Not of her skill, never that. Doubt of what followed. She thought of her mother's voice, stern but gentle, the way she used to say, "Just because you can doesn't mean you should." Nicole shifted her focus. She couldn't let herself drift. This wasn't about right or wrong. Not here, not today. This was about precision. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "Range 2247, target 1, left window." Her finger eased against the trigger guard. Not yet, not now. She remembered her first deployment. Afghanistan. She had been 20, barely out of training. They gave her a rifle, a hilltop, and told her to watch. She had taken the shot back then, too. Hit her mark. Saved a squad pinned down in the valley. Everyone called her a hero that night. But when the adrenaline drained, she had stared at her hands, trembling, realizing someone else's father, someone's brother, lay in the dirt because she had done her job too well. She never told anyone how she wept into her sleeve. Now, years later, the weight had dulled, but it never disappeared. Each shot stacked on the last like invisible bricks. Her eye narrowed. The generals moved, gesturing wildly at their maps, the silhouettes of power men drunk on their own voices. She thought, "Do you know I'm here? Do you know your war ends in this silence?" The commander shifted again beside her, restless. He couldn't believe what she was about to try. No SEAL, no Marine, no Ranger would. But Nicole wasn't them. She was something else, an equation given flesh, a life forged in the margins of mathematics and solitude. The desert stretched endless before her. Time slowed, seconds stretching like taffy. In that pause, she saw pieces of herself. A girl scribbling formulas in a notebook while other kids played ball. A cadet ignored by instructors who assumed her place was temporary. A soldier sitting alone at chow while others swapped stories of glory. Every part of her had been built for this very moment. Every doubt she'd endured had sharpened her to a single point. Her whisper came again, almost a prayer. Target 1 locked. The wind shifted. She felt it ripple against her neck, subtle, treacherous. Most would miss it. Nicole adjusted one last click, trusting instinct more than calculation. It wasn't arrogance. It was intuition born from years of listening to air itself. The commander whispered, "If you miss, we're dead." Her reply was a breath, barely audible. "I don't miss." She let the world collapse into stillness. Her fingers settled, pressure smooth, unbroken. She exhaled half a breath and froze. The rifle kicked, a thunderclap tearing through silence, echoing across the barren hills. The .50 caliber round leapt forward, faster than sound, carving through layers of wind and heat, dancing with physics itself. Nicole didn't watch the first man fall. She was already shifting. Target 2. Profile exposed, head turned by instinct at the thud of his comrade's body. She didn't hesitate. Another squeeze, another deafening crack, another round on its long, inevitable flight. Her body stayed calm, machine-like, but inside she felt the weight gathering. Target 3. Moving, the most dangerous, the most human. Panic twisted his steps as he lunged for cover. Nicole's mind raced. Distance, angle, speed, time to impact. Her hands moved before thought caught up. She led the shot by inches that meant everything. Another blast. Another bullet cutting through heat waves, chasing the man who didn't know death was already in motion. 12 seconds, 3 shots, 3 lives gone. Silence followed, thicker than before. The commander froze, binoculars still locked to his eyes. Then slowly, in disbelief, he exhaled one word: Jesus. Around them the SEALs stirred. Some whispered curses. Some just stared at Nicole as if she were something other than human. Nicole's cheek stayed pressed to the stock. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't smile. She whispered only into her mic, voice steady, calm. 3 high-value targets eliminated. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Her body began to move automatically, breaking down the rifle, storing it away with the care of a ritual. Every snap, every latch was muscle memory. She didn't need to see the compound to know chaos had erupted. Men would be shouting, scrambling, searching for a ghost they would never find. Still, as her fingers worked, her chest tightened. She had done it. The impossible. And yet the weight felt the same as it always did. 3 more names erased. 3 more shadows on her conscience. The commander crouched close, his face pale with shock. How the hell did you do that? Nicole glanced at him, the faintest trace of something unreadable in her eyes. Physics, practice, and not believing in impossible. He stared, searching her face again. No arrogance, no pride, just a quiet acceptance. And for the first time, he didn't see a guest at his table. He saw the most dangerous weapon he had ever witnessed. The team began to move, low and fast, retreating through the jagged terrain. Nicole followed, her pack heavy, her mind heavier. Behind them, the compound burned with confusion. Ahead, the night waited, and with it, the silence of a secret no one would ever speak aloud. Nicole kept her eyes forward. She never looked back at the men she had ended. She couldn't, because if she did, she feared she would see not enemies but faces. And faces stayed with her. As the SEALs slipped deeper into the hills, the commander whispered low enough that only she heard. "What are you, Hayes?" She didn't answer. Some truths weren't meant to be spoken. Instead, she thought of her mother's words again. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. But she had, and nothing in the desert wind could carry that weight away. The ground trembled with distant shouts. Alarms echoed from the compound like bells tolling in chaos. Searchlights swept the hillsides, carving through the night, desperate for a shadow that had already vanished. Nicole moved with the team, her body low, each step deliberate. The jagged rocks tore at her knees through the fabric, dust caked in her mouth, but she didn't falter. Not once. She was a ghost, and ghosts didn't stumble. The SEALs flowed around her, a rhythm they had built through years of fighting together. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Hand signals and instinct kept them aligned. Yet still, Nicole felt the invisible wall. She wasn't part of their rhythm. She was something added, extra, unearned. But tonight, none of them could deny what they'd just witnessed. The commander kept glancing back at her, his face carved in disbelief. She had turned his impossible into routine, and that unsettled him more than if she had failed. They halted at a ridge, catching their breath, eyes scanning the dark horizon. The commander raised his radio, voice steady but sharp. "Command, be advised. Targets eliminated. Extraction underway. Expect heavy enemy reaction." Static, then the reply. "Copy, maintain silence. Extraction point Alpha in 90 minutes. Stay low, move fast." 90 minutes, a lifetime in enemy territory. Nicole crouched behind a boulder, pulling her canteen, letting the water wet her lips without wasting a drop. The desert seemed louder now, every insect, every scrape of wind amplified against the silence that followed the shots. She felt the eyes on her. Not openly, not with words, but she felt it, the disbelief, the awe, the fear. Chief Williams finally broke it, his whisper ragged. 3 for 3. I didn't think anyone could, Jesus, Hayes." Nicole said nothing. What was there to say? She tightened her pack straps and rose. "We need to move." The commander studied her. He had questions, he always would, but the time wasn't now. For now, survival ruled all. They descended into a narrow gully, shadows swallowing them whole. Nicole followed at the rear, her rifle case slung tight against her back, her eyes sweeping every ridge, every opening. Ghosts were most vulnerable after the kill. She had learned that young. The march through darkness gave her time she didn't want, time to feel. 3 shots, 12 seconds. The world would never know, but she would. The images of the men flickered behind her eyes. Their gestures, their startled faces, the way one had reached instinctively for cover too late. Nicole swallowed hard. She didn't allow herself to imagine their families. She had once, long ago, after her first confirmed kill. She had imagined a boy waiting for his father, a wife who would never see her husband return. The weight had almost broken her. That night, she nearly told her commander she couldn't do it anymore. But war didn't forgive empathy. War demanded silence. So she learned to bury faces under equations, learned to turn fathers and sons into targets and ranges, learned to trade pieces of herself for the survival of people she would never meet. Still, the weight never left. It pressed against her ribs now as they moved, heavy and familiar. They stopped again, huddling in the shadows of an outcropping. The commander crouched, checking his GPS. 2 clicks to extraction. Patrols between us and Alpha. Expect tight timing. Nicole leaned against the rock, steadying her breath. Sweat stung her eyes. Her muscles ached, yet her mind remained cold, calculating. Then a sound cracked the stillness. A shot close, too close. The team dropped instantly, weapons drawn, eyes searching the dark. Another shot rang, followed by shouted orders in a language Nicole understood only in fragments. Enemy patrol. They had moved fast, too fast. The commander cursed under his breath. Contact, they're sweeping wide. Nicole's pulse stayed calm. She slid her sidearm free, her eyes scanning the ridgeline. Shadows moved, shapes, too many. Chief Williams whispered, "We can't stay pinned. We move now or we're boxed." The commander nodded. His voice was firm. South slope, move fast. Engage only if necessary. They bolted. Rocks scattered beneath their boots, gunfire spitting from the ridge. Bullets snapped overhead, biting into stone. Nicole ran, body low, pack heavy, lungs burning. The team spread out, returning controlled bursts of fire. Shadows fell, but more appeared. She reached a boulder, slid behind it, returned fire with calm precision. Her rounds cut the dark like answers written in ink. One target dropped, then another. Her sidearm felt like an extension of her hand, steady, certain. But still they kept coming. The commander's voice hissed over comms. 2 minutes to extraction. Push. Nicole moved again, legs trembling from fatigue, throat raw from dust. The horizon glowed faintly, the faint promise of the extraction bird, but distance still lay between. Another burst of fire ripped the ground near her feet. She dove, rolled, came up firing. The enemy's silhouettes tumbled, but adrenaline surged cold through her veins. In that moment a thought flickered, sharp as a blade. Was this worth it? She had ended 3 men to end a war. But if her team died here, if they were cut down before they reached safety, what had it mattered? What had her impossible bought them but graves in a foreign desert? The doubt bit deep, and for a second it almost unsteadied her hands. But then she saw the faces of the SEALs, the men who had doubted her, who had ignored her, who now ran beside her, trusting her with every step. She steadied. Doubt could wait, survival couldn't. The extraction point loomed, a rocky plateau, a flat stretch where the helicopter would descend. The sound reached them first, the heavy thrum of rotors cutting air, relief sharp and fleeting. The commander signaled, voice hard, "Last push, go." They sprinted, gunfire chasing them, the night alive with chaos. Nicole's chest burned, legs screaming, but she didn't stop. Not until she reached the clearing, rotors whipping dust into storms around them. The bird hovered, side door open, crew shouting, weapons firing to cover the team. One by one, the SEALs dove inside. Nicole followed, sliding across the metal floor, pack still clutched to her chest. The commander was last, firing until the final second before hauling himself in. He slapped the crew chief's shoulder. Up now. The helicopter lifted, bullets sparking against its hull, engines roaring against the desert. Nicole leaned back against the wall, chest heaving, sweat dripping into her eyes. The SEALs sat in silence, eyes darting, adrenaline still coiled tight. Some glanced at her, expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. The commander sat across from her, his gaze heavy. He didn't speak, not yet. He just stared, as though if he looked long enough, he could find the cracks in her certainty. Nicole looked away, eyes on the desert shrinking below. 3 men gone, a war shifted, and yet all she felt was the familiar weight, not triumph, not relief, just the knowledge that she had traded a piece of herself again. The bird carried them into the night, the desert shrinking behind them. And in that silence, Nicole wondered the question she could never answer aloud. How many pieces would she have left when this was all over? The helicopter's engines faded into silence as it touched down on the tarmac. Dust billowed up, catching in the floodlights, turning the night into a haze of gold and gray. The SEALs disembarked first, moving with the weary precision of men who had done this 100 times before. Nicole stepped down last, boots meeting solid ground, her rifle case gripped tight in her hand. For a moment she stood still, staring at the dark horizon. Out there lay the compound, now shrouded in chaos. Out there, 3 bodies lay cooling, men whose absence would ripple through armies, through cities, through entire borders. Out there, part of her remained, buried with them. The commander's voice cut through her thoughts. Debrief now. They moved inside the operations tent, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A map spread across the table, red markers still circled around the compound. The air reeked of stale coffee and sweat. The team gathered, some standing, some leaning against the canvas walls. Nicole stayed near the edge as always. The commander began. His tone was clipped, efficient. Mission objective adjusted mid-operation. 3 high-value targets eliminated. Extraction successful. 0 friendly casualties. A pause followed. No one spoke. The silence felt heavy, as if everyone knew the truth, that this mission had been something entirely different from what they had trained for. Finally, the commander looked up, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Nicole. Those shots, his voice trailed off, and for once the man who always had answers seemed to falter. They were impossible, and yet. He shook his head, as though the words couldn't form. Chief Williams leaned forward, his voice low but edged with awe. We all saw it, 3 rounds, 3 kills. She didn't just make the shots, she owned them. The commander's eyes stayed locked on Nicole. So tell me, Sergeant, who the hell are you really? Nicole shifted, her fingers brushing the case by her side. She met his stare, calm, steady, the same way she had met the crosshairs hours earlier. Staff Sergeant Nicole Hayes, Army sniper, attached for reconnaissance. The commander's jaw tightened. Don't play games with me. You and I both know you're not just some Army sniper. What you did tonight, he stopped, exhaled sharply. No one else on earth could have done that. Nicole felt the weight of the room pressing in. Every eye was on her. She thought of the file that carried her name, the blank pages where her missions should have been, the truths she could never tell. Her answer was soft, measured. With respect, sir, that's all I can say. Frustration flickered in his eyes, but he didn't push further. He knew the wall she spoke from. Classification wasn't a choice, it was a prison. Silence stretched again. The tent seemed too small, the air too thin. Finally, the commander rubbed a hand across his face and spoke to the room. What we witnessed tonight doesn't leave this circle. Officially, this was reconnaissance only. No shots fired. Understood. A chorus of quiet affirmatives followed. The team knew the drill. But inside, Nicole felt the sting. Erasure was part of her life. The world would never know. No medals, no citations, just whispers in rooms with no records. She slipped out of the tent after the debrief, stepping into the night air. The base was quiet, generators humming in the distance. Stars blanketed the sky, so clear, so endless. She tilted her head back, letting the sight wash over her. Out here, far from cities and noise, the universe felt close enough to touch. Her chest tightened. She thought of her father teaching her to map constellations when she was small. He had told her the stars were constants, guides for those who wandered. But Nicole didn't feel guided. She felt adrift, a shadow moving from one mission to the next, leaving behind nothing but silence. The tent flap rustled. The commander stepped out, his silhouette dark against the floodlights. For a moment he didn't speak. He just stood near her as if searching for words. Finally, his voice broke the quiet. "You changed the course of this war tonight." Nicole didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the stars. "Wars don't end with bullets, sir. They end with what comes after." He studied her profile, the way her features seemed carved from calm and exhaustion. "You ever regret it?" Her lips pressed tight. Regret. The word tasted like metal. She thought of her first kill, the trembling in her hands. She thought of the time she had sat alone in barracks, counting names no one else remembered. She thought of tonight, of 3 men who had no idea death was waiting 2,000 yards away. Finally she said, "Every time. But regret doesn't matter. What matters is if someone else gets to go home because of it." The commander nodded slowly. He didn't press further. He knew better. They stood in silence, the desert night wrapping around them. Finally he spoke again, softer this time. "Whatever you are, Hayes, I'm damn glad you were with us." For the first time she turned to look at him. And though her expression didn't change, something flickered in her eyes, a trace of gratitude, fleeting but real. Later, alone in her quarters, Nicole unlatched her rifle case. The Barrett lay inside, silent, gleaming under the dim light. Her fingers traced its cold steel. It wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of her, the language she had been given to speak when words failed. But it was also a reminder, a ledger of every life she had ended, etched into her memory with each shot. She sat on the edge of the cot, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. The quiet pressed in, heavier than gunfire. In the stillness, she whispered to herself, words she would never say aloud. "How many more before I'm empty?" The desert offered no answer, only silence. And in that silence, she realized something that chilled her. Tonight hadn't been her hardest shot, not even close. The news traveled faster than the wind. Not the official report. Those pages were blank, marked only with the sterile words, reconnaissance. No contact, no shots fired. But rumors had a way of moving, whispered through back channels, carried in coded transmissions. Somewhere in the desert, 3 enemy generals had fallen on the same night in the same room, as if struck by an invisible hand. To the world it was coincidence, bad luck, a crack in enemy unity. To those who had clearance it was something else, a miracle they couldn't explain. Nicole heard none of it. She sat in silence on her cot, boots unlaced, uniform still clinging with dust. The rifle case lay closed at her feet, a sealed confession. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. Every detail of the night played endlessly in her mind. 3 faces, blurred by distance yet etched into her memory. She hadn't known their names before, but she did now. She had read the intelligence brief after the mission, tracing the lines of their lives like a map. Fathers, sons, men who commanded thousands, men who believed themselves untouchable until they were. She thought of the last one, the man who had run for cover. For an instant she had seen something purely human, fear. It haunted her more than the silence after the kill. The door creaked open. Commander Thompson stepped inside, his presence filling the small room. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. He stood for a moment studying her. She didn't rise, didn't salute. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. He finally spoke. "Washington is spinning. 3 generals gone in 12 seconds. They're calling it the turning point." Nicole lowered her gaze. Officially, it never happened. He gave a half smile, bitter and knowing. "Officially, yeah. Unofficially, you just did more damage than a year of ground operations." Silence settled between them. The hum of the base generators bled through the walls, steady, endless. Then Thompson's voice dropped lower. "They want you again." Nicole's stomach tightened. She had known it would come. Success was a curse. Every impossible shot only led to another. He continued, "There's chatter about a meeting in the northern mountains. Different theater, different commanders. If it's real, they'll want eyes on. And if opportunity presents." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Nicole leaned back, hands clasped loosely in her lap. Her voice came quiet. "They won't stop until I break." For the first time, Thompson looked unsettled. He had seen men crack under pressure, had seen bodies fail before spirits. But in her eyes he saw something heavier, a question she carried alone. "You're not broken," he said, though it sounded more like a wish than a fact. She met his gaze. "Not yet." He didn't argue. He just nodded, then turned toward the door. Before stepping out, he said, "Whatever else happens, Hayes, what you did saved lives. Don't forget that." The door shut, leaving her in the stillness again. Nicole lay back on the cot, staring at the canvas ceiling. The words echoed in her mind, "saved lives." But at what cost? The ledger in her memory grew longer. Each name she learned after the fact etched deeper. She wondered how many saves it would take before she couldn't recognize herself in the mirror. Sleep came in fragments that night. Dreams twisted between childhood, her father guiding her through equations on a chalkboard, her mother's gentle lectures on physics, and the faces of men falling in silence, one after another, endless. When morning broke, she walked the perimeter of the base alone. The air was cool, the desert briefly gentle before the sun rose in fury. She liked these hours best, when the world was quiet enough to let her think. She found herself staring at the horizon, where mountains cut the sky into jagged teeth. The same mountains the commander had mentioned. She knew she would go. She always did. Orders weren't choices. But the question clawed inside her. What happens when I stop being their solution and start being their problem? Later that day, she sat in the briefing tent again. Different map, different pins, different targets, but the same voices, the same hum of strategy. The SEALs spoke in clipped sentences, their rhythm intact. Nicole remained at the edge, silent. This time, though, the silence felt different. Not dismissal, not disbelief, respect. Uneasy, quiet respect. Still, she didn't lean into it. Respect didn't erase the weight. It didn't make her part of them. She was a tool, precise, cold, and dangerous. And tools weren't embraced. They were used. As the meeting closed, Thompson caught her eye. He gave a subtle nod, not approval, not gratitude, something simpler, recognition. Nicole stood, slipping out into the daylight. The base buzzed with activity, vehicles rumbling, radios crackling, soldiers moving in patterns of routine. She walked through it all unseen, a shadow in daylight. But inside she wrestled with the truth. She had become what her call sign foretold: shadow, unseen, unacknowledged, essential, forgotten. That night, as she prepared her rifle, she whispered to herself the question that had no answer. How many shadows can a person cast before they vanish completely? The helicopter skimmed the ridgeline, its rotors clawing at the thin mountain air. Nicole sat strapped into her seat, rifle case between her boots, the vibration rattling through her bones. Outside, the peaks stretched endless, jagged monuments of stone cutting into a gray sky. She hated mountains. The air lied up here. Wind swirled without warning. Thin air changed bullet flight in ways even her equations couldn't fully predict. Mountains were alive, unforgiving, unpredictable. And tonight, they would decide everything. Across from her, the SEALs checked gear, their faces locked in focus. No chatter, no jokes, just silence before another descent into the unknown. Commander Thompson sat nearest the door, his eyes distant, lost in calculations of his own. Nicole closed hers for a moment, steadying her breath. In the darkness behind her eyelids, memories flickered, her father sketching parabolas in chalk, her mother pressing equations into her mind like scripture. She had learned young that numbers didn't lie, but what they never taught her was how truth could still weigh like sin. The red light above the hatch flicked on. 2 minutes. Nicole's pulse slowed the way it always did before insertion. Calm overtook her, cold and steady. Fear had no place here. The bird dipped, rotors straining. The mountains swallowed them whole, ridges rising like walls on either side. Then the hatch dropped, air rushing in thin and sharp. "Go," Thompson shouted. They spilled out into the night, boots hitting stone, the helicopter vanishing back into darkness. Silence returned, heavier now. Nicole crouched low, scanning the horizon. The target lay 3 kilometers east, an abandoned fortress carved into the cliffs, now host to another gathering of enemy leaders. Intelligence suggested more than just commanders this time. Planners, strategists, the kind of men who built wars with pens instead of rifles. The SEALs moved in a file, steps measured, bodies blending with shadows. Nicole followed, each movement rehearsed, each breath controlled. The climb was brutal. Thin air stole oxygen from their lungs, rocks crumbled under boots, the cold gnawed at fingers. Sweat froze on skin, every step a battle against fatigue. But they pressed on, silent, relentless. Hours later, they reached the overlook. Nicole dropped prone, sliding her rifle case open. Her fingers worked with ritual precision, assembling steel and optics into one. She pressed into the earth, scope angled toward the fortress below. Her breath caught. Through the glass she saw them. Figures gathered around firelight inside the stone hall. Heat signatures bloomed on her thermal screen, at least 15 men, clustered in tight conversation. Guards lined the walls, patrols circling outside. It should have been straightforward. Observe, record, report. The same words she had heard before, but Nicole knew better. The commander crawled beside her, his voice low. Visual. She nodded. Multiple personnel, upper hall, heavy security. His binoculars tracked the same scene. His jaw tightened. He didn't say it, but she could feel his thought pressing against hers. If they had the chance, if she had the chance, they might strike again. Nicole's chest tightened. She hadn't recovered from the last mission. Not fully. 3 lives already haunted her. Could she add more? The wind shifted suddenly, slapping her cheek, rattling her scope. She adjusted, reading it instinctively. Even here, even in this unforgiving air, she could still feel its language. Her throat felt dry. She whispered to herself, too low for anyone else. Not again, not yet. But she knew orders would come. They always did. As the night dragged, the SEALs rotated watch, each man taking a turn scanning the fortress. Nicole stayed prone, eyes unblinking, body unmoving. Hours slipped by, stars wheeling above. At one point, Thompson leaned close, voice a whisper in the dark. You ever think about what comes after? She didn't move her gaze from the scope. After what? He paused. After the missions, after the wars. Nicole's lips tightened. She thought of her childhood, of chalk and constellations, of dreams that had nothing to do with rifles. Then she thought of the ledger she carried, the names burned into her conscience. Finally, she said, I don't think I'm meant for after. Silence followed. Thompson didn't argue. He knew the truth in her words. Hours later, movement stirred inside the fortress. Figures gathered tighter, papers spread across the table. Nicole recognized the posture, the urgency. It was the same as before, men drawing maps of war, sealing fates with ink and arrogance. Her stomach turned. She thought of mothers waiting at home, fathers who would never return, children who would grow up in silence. She thought of the faces of the last 3, and the question returned, sharp and merciless, how many more? The radio crackled in Thompson's ear. He listened, then cursed under his breath. Nicole turned slightly. Orders. His eyes met hers, hard, reluctant. Authorization to engage if feasible, priority targets confirmed inside. Her breath caught, there it was, the weight she had dreaded. She pressed her eye to the scope again, watching the men below. Numbers spun in her head faster than she wanted them to. Range, wind, altitude, drop, drift. She could make the shots. She knew it, but her chest ached. Her hands trembled faintly just for an instant before she forced them still. Thompson's whisper cut the silence. "Can you do it?" Nicole didn't answer right away. She felt the wind on her skin, tasted the thin air in her lungs, heard the faint murmur of men building another war. Finally her voice came, steady but heavy. "I can. The question is, should I?" Thompson froze. He hadn't expected that. And in that pause, Nicole realized the truth. This mission wasn't just another equation. It was a mirror, a test not of skill but of soul. She had proven she could make the impossible shot. Now she had to decide what it meant to pull the trigger again. The crosshairs lingered on the men below, steady, unshaking. But in her chest, nothing felt steady at all. The cold bit into her skin, sharper now, as if the mountain itself had turned against her. Nicole lay pressed into the stone, scope trained on the fire-lit hall below. Her muscles ached from stillness, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Through the glass, the enemy commanders leaned over maps, their gestures sharp, their voices carrying faintly even at this distance. They were planning, deciding, carving futures with their hands, futures that meant more coffins. The radio clicked softly in Thompson's ear. Nicole didn't hear the words, but she saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand closed into a fist. He crawled closer, whispering, "They're pushing hard. Eliminate if possible. Full clearance." The words settled on her like lead. Eliminate, clearance. So clinical, so clean. But down there were men, flesh and bone, laughter and families. She exhaled slowly, steadying the tremor rising in her chest. Thompson searched her face. "Can you do it?" Her cheek stayed against the stock, but inside she spiraled. She thought of the last three, how one had reached for cover, how his eyes had widened just before her bullet found him. That moment lingered, replaying like a wound that never closed. Her breath misted faintly in the cold. She whispered, "I can, that's not the question." Thompson frowned. "Then what is?" Her lips pressed tight. She didn't answer, not yet. She recalculated because that's what she did when emotions threatened to take hold. Distance, 2,130 meters. Wind, variable, unpredictable, curling along the cliffs. Drop, nearly 12 feet at that range. Drift, shifting every second. She adjusted dial by dial, click by click, her body moving while her mind screamed. The crosshairs landed on one man, a tall figure leaning on the table with authority. He was the leader here, she could tell. Every gesture bent the room toward him. Kill him, and the ripple would fracture everything. Her finger hovered, steady, practiced. But her thoughts betrayed her. She imagined his home, a framed photo on a desk, a daughter he hadn't written in months, a wife who pretended not to notice the empty side of the bed. She had no proof of any of it, but she felt it. She always did. Her heart thudded against her ribs. A memory broke through. Afghanistan, years ago. A boy no older than 12 had wandered too close to a checkpoint. He'd carried nothing, no rifle, no explosives, just a satchel of bread. But the Marines had leveled their rifles anyway, nerves taut after weeks of attacks. Nicole had stood there, sight picture clean, finger brushing trigger. She could have ended him in a breath. But she hadn't. That night she'd seen him again, walking with his mother down the dirt road, alive. And for the first time, she realized that sometimes the hardest shot was the one you didn't take. Her finger twitched away from the trigger. The radio crackled again, louder this time. Thompson hissed, "They want it now. Hayes, this is it." Nicole's jaw clenched. She wanted to scream at the voice in his ear, at the faceless men in distant rooms giving orders they'd never have to carry. Instead, she whispered, so low it was almost to herself, "They don't know what it costs." Thompson's hand touched her shoulder, grounding her. "Hayes, what are you waiting for?" Her eyes never left the scope, the truth. He didn't understand, not fully. He thought in tactics and objectives. She thought in equations and consequences. And right now, the equation didn't add up. Through the glass, she saw the men arguing, slamming fists on the table. They weren't leaving. They weren't moving. The window of opportunity stretched open, daring her to act. But Nicole didn't squeeze. She couldn't, not yet. Her chest rose and fell, breath shallow. The silence between heartbeats stretched into eternity. Finally, she lifted her head from the scope. Thompson's eyes widened. "What the hell are you doing?" Her voice was calm, quiet, steady. "I'm not pulling the trigger just because they told me to. Not this time." He stared at her, stunned. Around them, the other SEALs shifted, uneasy. This wasn't defiance they were used to. This was something heavier. She continued, softer. "3 men were enough. I carry them every night. If I do this again without knowing why, without knowing what it actually changes, I won't come back from it. Not in here." She tapped her temple lightly. Thompson didn't respond. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he saw not a weapon, not a miracle of precision, but a person balancing on the edge of herself. Minutes passed, the commanders still plotting in their fortress below. Nicole breathed, steady, unhurried, refusing to let pressure dictate her soul. Finally she whispered, almost a vow to the night, "Sometimes restraint is the shot." And for the first time in her career, Nicole Hayes chose not to fire. The mountain wind carried the silence away, as if sealing her choice in stone. Dawn broke over the mountains like a wound opening to light. Pale streaks stretched across jagged ridges, spilling into the valleys below. Nicole lay still, cheek pressed to the stock of her rifle, eyes on the fortress bathed in gold. The commanders inside hadn't moved all night. They were still gathered, their voices carried faintly in the thin air, their silhouettes sharp against the firelight. She had tracked them for hours, crosshairs steady, every calculation perfect. And yet the rifle hadn't fired. She had chosen silence. The weight of that choice settled heavier than any trigger she had ever pulled. It pressed into her bones, a paradox she couldn't shake. Restraint had saved her soul, but it might cost lives she would never know. That was the cruel arithmetic of war. No equation ever balanced cleanly. Commander Thompson lay beside her, silent. He had stopped asking questions hours ago. He had seen the resolve in her eyes, the unyielding calm of someone who had faced herself and refused to bend. He didn't understand it, not fully, but he respected it. The radio crackled again, a voice sharp, impatient. "Hayes, report status." She lifted the mic, pressed the button, her voice steady. "Targets observed. No engagement. Recommend exfiltration." The silence that followed felt endless. Then the reply came, flat and cold. "Copy." No praise, no anger, just acknowledgement. She set the mic down, her hands trembling slightly for the first time in hours. She exhaled, closing her eyes. The hardest shot she had ever taken was the one she had denied herself. The SEALs began to pack, preparing for the long climb back to extraction. Nicole broke down her rifle, piece by piece, sealing it in its case. Each movement felt like ritual, like absolution. As they descended the ridge, the sun rose higher, burning away the shadows. The climb was brutal, the thin air gnawing at lungs, muscles screaming with every step. Yet Nicole felt lighter, not because the burden had gone, it never would, but because she had faced it and for once chosen herself over the mission. Hours later, they reached the extraction point. The helicopter arrived, rotors chopping the sky, dust whipping into storms around them. They boarded in silence, exhaustion etched into every face. Inside, Thompson sat across from her, his eyes fixed on hers. He didn't speak until the bird lifted, mountains shrinking below. Finally, he leaned forward, voice low enough that only she could hear. "You could have changed the war again." Nicole met his gaze, her own steady. "Or I could have lost myself completely." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Not approval, not agreement, just understanding. The rest of the ride passed in silence. Each man lost in his own thoughts, each haunted by different ghosts. Back at base, the debrief was short, clinical, observed. No engagement. Mission logged as reconnaissance only. Once again, Nicole's name vanished into the margins of history. That night she walked alone beyond the perimeter into the desert. The stars stretched endless above, cold and eternal. She sat on a rock rifle case beside her and let the silence wrap around her. Her thoughts wandered. To her father, chalk on his hands. To her mother, equations like lullabies. To the boy in Afghanistan, still alive because she hadn't pulled the trigger. To the 3 generals gone because she had. She realized then that her life would never balance. The ledger she carried would never close. Every choice would weigh, every silence echo. But maybe balance wasn't the point. Maybe it was something simpler. She whispered into the night, her voice carried on the desert wind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in that silence she understood. Her legacy wouldn't be medals or reports or whispered rumors in secret halls. It wouldn't be the kills she made or the legends others wrote. Her legacy would be the moments no one saw, the times she chose silence over fire, humanity over arithmetic. Because sometimes the most impossible shot wasn't about physics or distance or skill. Sometimes it was about restraint. And that, more than any bullet, could change the world.